The world is waking up, and you finding your way here today is no coincidence. The spirit world always has a way of guiding us where we most need to be at the absolute perfect time. I'm your host, Lindsay Morlock, and you're listening to the Guided Podcast, where we explore how the spirit world works on our behalf to guide us along our paths. This is where you'll learn how to live a life that is both conscious and connected, so you can supercharge your pathway to healing and open to life's magic and miracles. Come along this journey to see how guided you truly are. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Guided. This week, we're diving into the intersection of our perception and our conscious awareness. I'm going to be sharing two stories with you that illustrate both sides of the scale here. And what I want to do first is start with the meat of the message from Spirit as it relates to the two stories I'm about to share. And the message is that when we have magical and or grandiose experiences or things happen in our lives, one of two things tends to happen. One, we are either so focused on the grandiosity and the magic of the experience that we completely lose sight of the mirror being shown to us and the underlying lesson that Spirit is trying to communicate. Or two, we are so focused on or steeped in the actual lesson that we lose sight of what magic exists in the experiences that we have. So I'm going to dive right into an experience I had recently to help illustrate that first point. So a couple months ago, my roommate and I decided to make our monthly Costco run. And normally we take her car there, not for any particular reason. That's just what we normally do. But this time, just before we left the house, my friend said to me, "Do you mind if we take your car?" And I was like, "No, not at all." So we get in the car. And we needed to first stop at the vet to pick something up. So just before we arrive at the vet, all of a sudden we feel this subtle but noticeable juggering in my car. You know how when you're driving on the highway, if you veer far enough off to the side of the road, like you might feel your car vibrating on top of those grates? That's kind of what it felt like. It was weird, but it just happened for a few minutes, or I should say a few moments, and then it stopped. So we arrive at the vet. My friend runs inside to get what she needed, and we start to head to Costco. And on the way, we start to notice that my car was now screeching along with that juggering, and then it would just go away. Then I would try to accelerate, and maybe we would notice it very subtly, but then I would accelerate again, and my entire car and steering wheel was shaking so hard that I had to pull over and call the Nissan dealer immediately to basically ask them if they thought my car was about to blow up and I should get it to the dealer via tow truck, or if they thought I could make it to the dealer driving there, which was about a 9-minute drive from where we were, to give you context. So I was speaking with the technician on the phone, and he was uncertain about how to guide me. He believed I'd probably be able to make it okay, but he also said, "Hey, if this is your transmission, be aware that the entire car could just stop on you altogether." I was like, great. So I guess we're going to, take our life into our hands and try this. And so the service guy then asked me, "Do you know if you have any kind of extended warranty on this thing?" And I said, "Well, I bought it certified pre-owned, so I think it did come with an extended warranty, but I bought it in New Jersey, so I feel like I probably lost the warranty when I moved, right?" And he said, "No, not necessarily. Let me just check that for you." So he pulled me up in the system and said, "You aren't going to believe this, but your warranty actually expires in 2 days." My jaw dropped. I was like, "Are you kidding me? How crazy is that timing?" And he said, "Yeah, it's a good thing we looked at this." He said, "Get this car in here today, and we're going to make sure that we get this written up today so that no matter what's wrong with it, it'll still be covered by your warranty." So I took a deep breath. I said thank you to Spirit and asked Spirit for help, and especially for help in getting me and my friend and the car safely to the dealership. So as we were driving there, the juggering and screeching was getting worse and worse. The RPM dial in my car was going haywire. And you could tell that when I was accelerating, it's almost like the car was jumping, like the car was having a hard time catching the right gear. And I just, through the whole driving process, continued to breathe, continued to ask Spirit for help. We were patting my car on the dashboard, encouraging her that she could make it. And she did, because we pulled into the service department of the Nissan dealership. And the service agent told me that if this had to happen, he's like, well, at least this particular day was a good one because they were unusually quiet that day. So that also felt really lucky. So then I asked him if they issued or offered any kind of loaner cars, given that my friend and I would otherwise need to figure out a different way home, whether Uber, we called someone. And he said he wasn't really sure that he had any, but he was going to double check for us. And amazingly, luckily, his colleague had a loaner that he immediately turned over to us, and it was the only loaner left. Thank you, more please, I said to Spirit, right? Thanking for the gift and a request for expansion. That's the thank you, more please prayer. And so my friend and I waited all of 20 minutes in the waiting area before they gave me the loaner, and we continued on to Costco. We made it home even in time to feed and care for our animals without even missing a beat. It was kind of crazy how seamlessly everything flowed, despite the fact that we had this hiccup. So there were a lot of synchronicities throughout this entire experience, from my friend asking me to take my car instead of hers, to my warranty being valid for only 2 more days, to having that loaner available to me. It was very clear to me that Spirit's hands were all over this experience, right? I knew, or I should say Spirit knew, my car was going to have trouble. And my friend luckily was the one to prompt us to find that out by requesting we take my car. Had she not asked me to take my car, I would never have figured out that there was a problem until well after the warranty had expired. So that was hugely synchronistic. And I was never inconvenienced, honestly, throughout this entire experience. We did feel a little dicey driving the car to the dealer because it was a bit unnerving hearing all those noises and feeling the juggering and feeling uncertain about what was going to happen on these busy roads we needed to take to get where we were going. But we truly were protected the entire way. We got there safely. We were completely taken care of and supported throughout the entire experience. And so, the past few months, I've been in a place where I've been second guessing how magical this path actually is sometimes. So I felt like my lesson through this experience was about Spirit showing me how very supported and guided we are at all times. And all of that is true. And because I was so fixated on how magically synchronistic this entire experience was, I didn't bother to look any deeper into the experience. I simply went home, continued about my business, staying aligned, of course, remaining in gratitude to Spirit for how supported and safe I was and we were throughout the experience. But later that evening, I get a call from the dealer telling me that my transmission needed to be completely rebuilt. And luckily, I wasn't going to owe a dime on it because it was still under warranty. But what the service agent continued to explain to me was that the juggering we were feeling and the screeching we were hearing was the car trying to shift gears while accelerating. It's almost as if it were trying to shift gears, but it couldn't quite shift where it wanted or needed to be. When that belt wasn't catching properly, that was causing the juggering and the loud noises. And all I could think of in the moment he told me that was how unsafe that experience could have turned out and how grateful I was that it all worked out the way that I did. So that was that. And I continued about my day. And the next morning, when my own mentor and coach connected with me, she actually gave me this bigger message that I'm sharing with you today that I started this episode with about, how I was so focused on how supported I was through the entire experience, which is true. But I was so focused on that I didn't even bother to look or get curious into what the external circumstances were mirroring about my inner experience, about my inner world. Now, if you aren't familiar with the mirror principle, I encourage you to reference episode 6 of this podcast to understand what I'm speaking about more deeply. But what this entire experience with my transmission was mirroring to me was how I go about moving forward in my life. This transmission in my car experience was mirroring my own personal transmission. And when we consider this story from that perspective, what I can share with you is that I've been a place in my life for the past 2 years of trying to move forward in a way that is completely different from any way that I've ever lived before. I'm living my life in a way that comes more from a heart-based place instead of a mind-driven place. I'm being asked to disregard social norms, disregard socially acceptable measures of success and milestones. I've been asked to disregard a conventional life to opt instead for a more extraordinary one. And finding my way to adopt this new life really requires me to step into a completely new way of being. And it's a way of being that felt and still sometimes feels very foreign to me, right? I'm not living my life in a way that most people are living their life. I'm not taking the rational route. I'm taking the more intuitive route to decisions and approaches, and they're rarely logical. And I feel much safer with the logical than with the intuitive, except that is now changing. I am starting to feel much more comfortable living this intuitive life. And I know I am more safe and more secure on that path than I am on this perceived logical or rational path. That said, it has been a huge adjustment moving from that old way of being to this new way of being. And I have been in a great deal of resistance to various facets of my life and to various facets of this way of being, particularly when my mind tells me that I should be someplace that my reality doesn't match, right? So this journey has required me looking at everything I assigned value to and why I valued it. I had to reevaluate why I valued those things. I had to evaluate what I believed about money and earning and jobs. I had to look deeply at what types of things externally were actually fueling my sense of self-worth and strip those away. I had to look at how much the approval from others impacts my behavior and how it motivates me or drives me instead of allowing my heart to drive my behavior. And these are just to name a few of the things. So it was uncomfortable, right? To have these realizations and to move through to a place of understanding what my soul actually values, what my soul actually finds safe, living life in this different way. And my internal process was just like that transmission issue in my car. Sometimes the juggering was very subtle and I could just barely detect it in my body. And I'd be moving forward and moving through my life as if everything were great, even though there was something in my body asking for me to pay attention to. Other times, my journey and, my body and my emotions were screaming out to me as a result of the resistance and pushing against what was showing up in my reality. For me, moving forward in my life has been a very jerky process. And, I would process my emotions. I would reach for the perspective of my higher mind, but sometimes I was really identified with these 3D beliefs. And I could feel my ego keep trying to downshift my internal gears away from that 5D perspective and back into this third dimensional paradigm, right? And the paradigm that keeps me stuck, the paradigm that keeps me safe, instead of looking at the things from the lens of love, from that 5D perspective. And this way of moving forward is much like what the mechanic said about my transition. He said, it's like you're trying to shift gears, but the belt can't quite catch that higher gear. And that's what I was doing, right? I'm living in this 3D paradigm. I'm experiencing my reality in 3D. And yet I'm trying to reach for that higher perspective when my ego is trying to hold me back. And so there were times where I was successfully shifting into that gear. And then other times that belt just couldn't quite catch because I was so identified with my 3D beliefs, even though they weren't true. So that's been my inner experience, right? My intention is to reach for that fifth dimension. My intention is to reach for the higher ground and to reach for my soul's wisdom. But sometimes I just couldn't shift gears. Instead of shifting gears to that fifth dimension, I'd fall to the temptation of my ego's desire to keep me in a third dimensional paradigm. So not only did we need to rebuild my actual car's transmission, but I truly feel like the last 2 years of my life, I've been working on rebuilding my own transmission, rebuilding the way I relate to and navigate change in my life, allowing myself to more easily shift into that higher perspective and that fifth dimension when my ego tries to pull me into these lower frequencies. reaching for how love would have me see a situation, even when my ego tries to downshift me back into fear, back into anxiety, back into those lower feeling emotions. But as a result of all of this, and let me add, I am by no means done learning this, but getting to this point has really helped me to fortify my foundation, to understand where my true safety and security lies, what my true needs really are. And it's allowed me a greater sense of peace as I've learned how to relax into whatever is unfolding right here, right now in my life, knowing that no matter what, I'm going to be guided and protected and fully supported along this path. Now, shifting gears, no pun intended, to the opposite scenario where we are often so steeped in a lesson that we completely miss out on how supported we truly are. We completely miss out on the magic that spirit rolls out. So a story that illustrates this: about 8 years ago, I was in a car accident. I guess I got a lot of car stuff in my life. I was living in New Jersey at the time, and I was on my way to my corporate job. I was traveling along a major highway in rush hour traffic, so my car wasn't moving too quickly. But as I was driving along and approaching a merge to an exit, I noticed that an 18-wheeler that was merging next to me didn't seem to be paying attention to the road, wasn't slowing down, and didn't at all look like he was aware that he needed to merge. And because of the rush hour, I couldn't speed up to get away from him or get in front of him. And the cars in front of me were slowing down to a near stop. And so I could see as he finally started to merge behind me that he wasn't slowing down. And before you know it, he plows right into the back of me, crushing the entire back of my SUV. Glass comes like crashing through the back, and he sent me right into a plumbing truck that was right in front of me. Now, not knowing the damage the plumbing truck in front of me and I had, we both pulled off the shoulder of the road. And don't you know, the truck driver just acted as if nothing happened and literally just kept driving off. So I'm now fumbling around my car looking for my cell phone because it went flying off my passenger seat somewhere in my car. And by the time I could find my phone and call the police, the truck was too far ahead of me to try to capture a picture of his license plates. There was way too much traffic to try to catch up with him. I didn't know the state of my car. So to make a long story shorter, here are some of the headlines, right? This accident ended up being a hit and run. A friend of mine, whose husband is a state trooper, looked into the accident to see if any bystanders happened to call in a report of what they saw, but nobody did. When I called the police, I didn't feel like they took my request all that seriously about trying to locate the truck driver, even though I could see that there was a police car up ahead who could have gone after the truck, given my specific description of it and my location, despite not having his actual license plate. And so I was in a bit of shock about that and annoyed. But otherwise, there wasn't a single scratch on my body, just a bit of neck and back trouble that later needed to be resolved. But my car was totaled. And at the time of the accident, I was able to call my boss to tell her what happened and that I wasn't going to be able to make it into the office. When the tow truck picked me up and brought me back to the shop, I was quickly able to get home. Luckily, I had someone who happened to be available to come pick me up. My boss even offered to pay for a rental car as long as I needed one to help me get to work until I was able to get a new car. So there was incredible abundance there. And when I did get a rental car, the agent took pity on me and gave me extra money for gas, not to mention an upgraded vehicle. So I was completely taken care of, right? There were many people who were very generous with me through this whole experience, right? People were showing up to support me in unexpected ways left and right. And you know what? I couldn't focus on any of that good. I could only focus on how pissed off I was that the truck driver just hit my car and then fled the scene. I was angry that my brand new car was now completely totaled. The car was not yet paid off. So I was freaking out about financially how I was going to be able to afford a new one, given that I literally just bought this one. So the picture I'm painting here is one of me feeling like a victim. And I was choosing to be in this place of, this kind of stuff is always happening to me. I can't ever change my circumstances. Feeling like every time I try to get ahead financially or trying to heal my neck or my back, which I've had long-standing issues with, right? Something always happens to set me back. So the lessons for me in this were plentiful, but the truth is that the event itself was not that horrific. Yes, it's true that my car was totaled in a hit and run accident. Yes, I had some residual neck and back issues to work out, but overall, I was completely fine. But in choosing to play the victim, in choosing to allow these circumstances to rob me of my peace, I failed to see all of the different miracles and gifts that did play out in my life, like my boss offering to pay for a rental car. My car insurance company was absolutely amazing to work with and didn't give me a hard time at all about anything with the condition of my car. I even found out that I had gap insurance when I purchased my car, which truthfully, I didn't even really understand when I signed it until this accident happened. So not only was the totaled car paid off, I ended up getting a higher end model of the same car coming out of this accident. The rental agent upgraded my vehicle and gave me extra gas money, right? So I was fully supported. And had I processed my emotions from the accident, I would have been able to move through the lessons with far more grace and ease and connect with the many gifts that came out of it than I did. But this is the purpose of this podcast, right? To remind you that the experiences we have in our lives are rarely either or situations. They're usually both and. We both experience the lesson and can connect in with the magic and miracles of the situation. And finding that balance is important because our ego minds tend to focus on one or the other. When I was in the depths and the throes of my egoic ways, my mind wanted to always focus on being the victim and on how things were happening to me, not how things were happening for me. And I've never been a particularly positive person. That's something that I've really had to work hard to try to shift and still do, because it's not something that comes to me naturally. It's something I consciously have to work on a daily basis. So it's not uncommon for me to get stuck in a lesson. It's much more common for me to not see how magic and miracles are playing out in my life. However, I'm learning more and more that we really need to connect with both the lessons and the magic. And that's just one of the many ways that we bridge our consciousness and spirituality. We bring conscious awareness to all the truths, that we are fully supported and guided, and we are here to learn and move through lessons and develop deeper consciousness within ourselves in order to support our evolution. So I hope these stories offer a bit of inspiration, but more importantly, encouragement to see the both and situations in your life. See both the lessons and the magic in all of your experiences. I think that's the level of depth that really helps us to bring conscious awareness to our evolution. And so as you're moving through different obstacles in your life, as you're moving through different hardships, take time to not only see how fully supported you are through the hardship, but also take the time to understand how these experiences externally are mirroring things happening in your internal world. When we get curious and open to what all of that means, we can really accelerate our healing process. So I hope you enjoyed this episode this week. And as always, thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Thank you so much for listening to the Guided Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be so grateful if you would share it with a friend or even leave me a review so we can ensure that it makes its way into the ears of listeners who need to hear these messages most. Until next time, may you remember how guided you truly are.